South Africa is set to host some 51 heads of state for the 15th BRICS Summit, which gets underway officially tomorrow. Parliament says the gathering has the potential to open up limitless opportunities for global collaboration. This year's summit will explore expanding the bloc, with more than 20 countries already wanting to join it. Let's discuss the significance of the BRICS Summit with former Ambassador Kingsley Makhubela, who's also a director of Risk Recon. Ambassador, good afternoon. Thanks for coming through.
Good afternoon, Ratan. Always a pleasure.
It doesn't get bigger than this. I mean, in recent history for South Africa, I don't think we've hosted a global summit of this nature.
This should be the biggest in a while. And you're having heads of state from different countries that are descending on our shores. It's quite interesting to see how we're going to manage this and what will be the outcome later on.
Yeah, because if it's managed well, it's going to send the right message to the rest of the world that South Africa is capable even managing such a big summit with global leaders.
Absolutely. And because of the security nightmare, if you get a gathering of so many heads of state, who some of them are bringing their own baggage to our shores. So our security need to be in their best.
Yeah, away now from security, the summit itself, just an overriding question. How significant is this 15th summit for the BRICS bloc?
The summit is going to be very important, Radan, because it's going to define how the world interfaces with each other, particularly the global north and the developing south. And of course, the new world order that is likely to emerge out of this, because you have the financial challenge of the usual hegemony that we've had of the IMF and the World Bank. So it's definitely a game changer.
Yeah. You and I have spoken before about the importance of multilateralism, but we're seeing that it's challenged by these different power blocks or these new emerging regional blocks. And the president last night, in his address to the nation, setting the scene for today, he said we live in a very complex and increasingly fractured world.
But then we need to see this in the context of different powerhouses, not competing against each other, but complementing each other. Because so far we've had a single power that dominates the political, economic, and the social space, even the sporting space. So you're going to see a total different change out of the summit here.
Yeah, how likely is this summit going to emerge as what I call a BRICS plus? Currently, because when it started, it was a BRIC. And South Africa was then joined, became BRICS. Now there's talk of expansion. The likes of Cuba, Argentina, Saudi Arabia raising their hands, say, we want to be part of this. How likely, let me ask you that question rather this way, how likely do you think it is that from Sandton we will emerge with some form of a BRICS plus, an expanded BRICS?
I don't think they will come out of the summit with expanded BRICS, but they will come out of the summit with agreed principle in terms of how they're going to expand, because they are still bogged down to question of the criterion for, including new members. So I think after the summit, they will agree in terms of the principle and they will lay them out quite clearly. And those aspirants who are quite interested to join, they will understand what are the criteria for joining.
So it's very important to agree on the criteria, set them up so that if you say, I want to join, they say, these are the conditions.
Do you meet the criteria? I think that's what, and they've been bogged down in terms of agreeing what are the criteria. There's no agreement among the 5 member states. I think the summit will take a decision in terms of the recommendation that will come from the ministerial and senior officials' meetings.
And the foreign ministers will be meeting and they'll put something to the heads of state.
To the summit.
Yeah. So how important you think for BRICS to expand under the current global context of these competing power blocks?
BRICS would have to decide how they're going to expand. Are they going to include everyone? Because there are 23 countries that want to join now. And I understand there are 40 more countries who want to join.
So the queue is getting longer.
The queue is getting much longer. So what will be the purpose of extending this to include all other organizations? And remember, BRICS, it's a club. It's not an international organization. They don't have a secretariat. They don't comply in terms of that. So they would have to decide moving forward. My view, Braden, has been that you have a similar organization, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is an international organization. Most of the people who want to join the BRICS, they're part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Are you going to have BRICS expanded and Shanghai Cooperation Agreement competing? Because if you look at the agenda, it's the same.
Yes, so you really have to be mindful of that. Or do you still want to maintain it, expand it, but still maintain that club feel to it?
Well, expand it. You can expand it and call others the plus. They have identities. You're going to have similar problems that you are having within the Security Council now, that you have those who are inside and those who are outside. So there ought to be a political decision as to what is the expansion going to look like.
Yeah, so because if you include everybody properly, and once you've agreed on the criteria, you can no longer just call it BRICS, because BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
You need to have a total different configuration, and that's why I'm saying compare that with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah. The other issue you've mentioned is the financial considerations of the world, where there's been this unilateral, unipolar power. There's moves around the currency. Should BRICS think about its currency? Currently, a number of BRICS members are trading in their own currencies, not necessarily using the dollar. There's even a growing movement in Africa. Parts of East Africa, the countries, Kenya and their neighbors like Djibouti, are already trading in their own currency, because they say dollar is not ours. We can trade with our own currencies. For BRICS, do you think the move towards some kind of let's call it a BRICS currency, is a wise move?
I think this summit would probably discuss a basket of currencies to be used. There's no need to have every currency, but they would agree on a basket to be used, and this basket of currencies would include key regions of the world, I suppose. And then they can then determine moving forward, because to come out to a monetary union of the BRICS, it's going to take time, because you have countries with divergent monetary systems and political systems. So moving forward may create a challenge for them for now.
Yeah, so that's one. And then the other aspect for BRICS is around trade and investment. There is a BRICS Business Forum that's been happening. And also around it, we've got the President Xi Jinping from China. He's having a state visit.
Yes.
So issues of how do we cooperate with each other and as a bloc are going to be very key, especially in promoting cooperation around trade and investment.
I think this summit would have to deal with questions of trade barriers that exist. They exist amongst countries, they exist amongst regions. Now, the advantage that we are having here in Africa is that the Free Africa Trade Zone that has already emerged, and I think it's easier than to negotiate with other areas. But there's a need to look at the protocols governing these barriers and how to do away with the barriers. And one strategic thing I think that South Africa should have thought about, what is the legacy that South Africa would want? Because we're not going to host another summit in the next 4 years. We'll probably host it in the next 5 years, even much longer. So what is the legacy that South Africa should have? In my own view, but then we should have thought about the maritime transportation, which is so strategic, given the location that we have in the access to Brazil, the access that we have to Asia and to Europe. And we should have thought about that and harnessing that and developing this maritime transportation as a legacy for the BRICS that we hosted here. I don't know what is a legacy project that South Africa wants to pursue moving forward.
And that's going to be very interesting. That's a very important point, because we've got this long coast. We've got the Indian Ocean, we've got the Atlantic Ocean, and there's a lot of trade vessels that move between even the Americas and Europe and Asia.
And that's why the big fight around the Simonstown naval base is a strategic location of the area. That from there you have access to many areas, but we can commercialize the geostrategic location of our country to have access to all these areas.
Yeah. So the legacy as well, could it be about what BRICS through South Africa brings to the rest of the continent? The president last night talking about how important it is for Africa, the rest of Africa, not just South Africa, to benefit from the BRICS.
Well, that's where the big challenge is in terms of Africa. Remember, we have the regional economic blocs that were agreed within the AU. SADC, we have ECOWAS, we have East Africa. So we should have moved in terms of consolidating unity around these areas. And these building blocks actually are the ones that are going to facilitate unity of Africa. But we are lagging behind. We're still having a challenge here in SADC area in terms of integration. There are challenges in other parts of the continent. If we were to move fast in terms of integration of these RECs, I think it will facilitate better participation of Africa in the BRICS.
Just on the doorstep of the BRICS Summit, the President last night talking about the importance of South Africa's non-aligned forest policy stance. And we know it's been under the spotlight since Russia invaded Ukraine. And South Africa has been criticized, has been asked questions. But he was saying we do with everybody. And some of the people that we cooperate with, we trade with, some of these power blocks are also competing amongst each other. How important was it for the President, in your view, to again restate South Africa's non-aligned foreign policy?
I think the country should resist to be aligned with a particular country. As we are talking, Braden, the United States imports from Russia 28% of enriched uranium for its own energy needs. So there's business going on between the United States and Russia. Why should we take sides instead of dealing with all these powers that are there in the world? I think we should resist that. It's not a question of you are with us or with them. We should look at what is that of strategic importance to the country and be able to pursue that in our discussion and interaction with this world. In any way, the world is meant to facilitate better interaction irrespective of the ideologies. That's why the concept of coexistence is so fundamental in terms of having a peaceful world and a world that is very caring.
Okay. Besides showing the rest of the world that we can host such summits and the heads of state from everywhere can be very looked after here very well, as you mentioned, air security. Besides discussing some of these key aspects, when we look back come Friday, this summit is going to end on Thursday. In your view, what would success of this particular summit on our shores look like, especially because you've pointed out South Africa will not have another opportunity in the near future to host a BRICS Summit?
I think there will be a lot of things that would go on during the closed session. And I hope South Africa would articulate the idea of reaching some agreement between the tension that is building up between India and China, the border dispute that is there. That's something that they need to deal with in a closed session. You can't have members of the club that are at war with each other because it's going to affect how they relate to each other. So I think those are issues that must be handled during the closed session. There are other issues that must be handled during the closed session, and I think they would come up. I think President Putin will also brief them about the conflict in Ukraine, and they will probably take some position in terms of how to fast-track any peaceful process that may emerge out of this. Because summit is a political summit, and political leaders must take hard political decisions. And those are not going to be taken in the plenary. They'll be taken in the closed session.
Ambassador Kingsley Makhubela, thank you very much for your time and insights here. Just to preview for us as we set the scene for the official start of the 15th BRICS Summit in Sandton tomorrow. He's also a director of Risk Recon.